Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, November 19th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Michael D'Antonio, journalist and author of The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. Also on the program today, midterms nearly resolved. Senate and governor in Florida called for the Republicans as the Democrats destroy the Republican Party in California. Just gone. Meanwhile, in California, as the wildfires still rage, 80 now dead, hundreds still missing, Trump puts his grievance and ignorance in the forefront. And as the CIA fingers Mohammed bin Salman in the Khashoggi killing, Trump sticks his fingers in his ears. Nancy Pelosi under fire, looking at a potential leadership challenge, and her proposal to change a House rule is perhaps one of the best reasons to challenge her, but from the left. McConnell kills the so-called bipartisan criminal justice reform bill. That was fun while it lasted. And Ohio stunning gerrymandered state house to bring the worst conservatives have to offer. Meanwhile, Julian Assange may be close to prosecution in the United States. And only because I'm so old, I remember coverage of the Obamas. Melania Trump's $200,000 hotel bill for a Toronto day trip. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Ladies and gentlemen, that Melania Trump story.
I mean, well, what's the exchange rate?
That's a good point. Favorable to you, those of us in the United States. So, but I don't know. Those stories tend to get a little petty, but like I say, only because I remembered the relentless multi-year project that was reporting on Michelle Obama's trip to Europe, that I even mentioned those things. But more importantly, I want to do this story up top here, just briefly. We had mentioned it, but as I read it, it was also flagged for us by a listener who sent us an email. You've seen the story. The email puts it into a slightly different, a different context. This is from listener Mike, who apparently worked in Congress at the Congressional Research Service. And so he would, from time to time, provide incoming House and Senate freshmen, fresh people, just a how-to work your way around the Congress from a bureaucratic standpoint. And so he flagged this, and this story is out there. There are now 17 incoming Democratic freshman representatives who have signed a letter saying that they will contest Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. An 18th has also committed to that. She has not signed the letter. I think it's Spanberger who beat Dave Bratt. I haven't looked at the entire list of the 17, but the vast majority of them are to the right of Nancy Pelosi. All right, so with that said, and I think that's a problem. I don't want a Speaker of the House who is to the right of Nancy Pelosi. And I think people who have listened to this program for an extended period of time, I'm far more interested and think it would be far more helpful for the Democrats to replace Chuck Schumer, who I think is relentlessly bad and incompetent and worse, particularly in light of the recent revelations about his essentially moonlighting for Facebook. But there have been two things about what's going on, or three things that really stick out for me in terms of the Pelosi thing. Is one, that for those of us on the left who want to see a change in the Speaker of the House, it's important to make sure that we get something better. That sounds a little bit less sexy and, in my mind, sort of basic. But there's a lot of people who lose sight of that. And I'm not convinced yet that there is a candidate on the left who can win. Remember, because the Republicans vote in this for the Speaker of the House. It's just ostensibly you need a certain amount of Democrats to maintain the majority. So Republicans could theoretically vote for a candidate, a more right-wing Democrat. They probably would vote for more left-wing. I mean, they would rather Nancy Pelosi because they've dedicated a significant amount of resources and time to demonize her. But to the extent that there is a reason to get rid of Pelosi, for me, the biggest reason for me in the past has been her stated support prior to the election even for PAYGO. What is PAYGO? PAYGO means that anything that the Congress passes, any programs that they vote for and pass, must be offset in terms of their cost. Pay as you go. No deficit spending. This is absurd from a policy perspective. It is absurd from a political perspective. There is no constituency out there for PAYGO.
I was listening to, or reading Democracy in Chains again. The Libertarian Koch brothers are big fans of PAYGO and have been for decades. Of
course, because it constrains spending. And so Republicans get in, and this is the game that's played. Republicans get in, they increase the deficit, then they immediately find, after they've done this, they immediately find a more fiscal responsible profile. And that's the way that they use it. You know, they attempt to leverage the cutting of Social Security and Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. So PAYGO is a problem. And to set that as a constraint, it is almost like it's a transcendent policy insofar as it impacts every other policy and every other ability to push a progressive agenda. There's now a proposal in a change of the rules to the House because incoming leadership gets to change the rules of how the House operates. You could do it every year at the beginning of the session. It is proposed by Pelosi and Massachusetts Representative Richard Neal. It would, quote, require a 3/5 supermajority to raise individual income taxes on the lowest earning 80% of taxpayers. Now, that sounds all well and good. First blush, it's like, yeah, good. Increase the taxes on the top 20%. Don't raise them on the rest of the country. The only problem with that is, as you start to realize it, particularly in light of PAYGO, in particular, you take a whole host of progressive policies off the table. Right now, that bottom 80%, incidentally, along with the top 20%, is paying essentially have the lowest income tax burdens in the history of the country. Well, maybe not the history, in modern times. Since at least, let's say, 75 years. I suspect it's actually longer than that. But let's call it 75 years. And what it basically does is it says it takes off the table all of these progressive initiatives and prevents Democratic representatives from having to make a so-called tough vote to raise taxes on people in the middle class and theoretically living in poverty. It just puts unnecessary constraints that are really there just to protect people from taking votes that are meaningful. If the Democrats want to actually pass a rule that is helpful in terms of, let's say, populist policies, then institute a 3/5 supermajority needed to cut Medicare or cut Medicaid or cut Social Security. And now this, again, wouldn't be a problem if Nancy Pelosi hadn't been so adamant about pay-go. If the Democrats came in and said, like, we have no problem adding to the deficit, and let's punt this. If the Republicans are so concerned about fiscal responsibility, let them raise taxes on everybody when they eventually take the House. So this is really problematic. And, this is a fight I don't know how much people outside of Congress can really influence. But good thing to tweet at freshman representatives that you're aware of this. And to tweet at representatives, don't handcuff yourselves. We are putting you there to vote on and to pass. And obviously without the Senate, none of these things are going to become law. But it's important that Congress puts their stamp on it now. We want you to pass progressive legislation, and anything that's going to stand in that way, do not vote for, like these new proposed rules. Important to have some awareness of what, the depth of these issues. The other stuff about that you hear from the left about Nancy Pelosi, largely I think is just misinformed. I'm in favor of new leadership in the House, but not at the cost of having someone more conservative there. Nevertheless, like I say, there are some reasons to find real problem with what Nancy Pelosi is doing. That proposed law, it strikes me, is a gift to the right. The best argument for the left agitating to unseat Nancy Pelosi is so that she feels she has to give stuff to the left rather than give stuff to the right. You need to balance out the pressure that's coming from the right. So, all right, let's look into just some of these videos of Donald Trump making an ass of himself in California. Before we do, 2018 has been a difficult year for human rights. But have you ever wondered how rights and abuses are documented around the world? You probably have. The sheer volume of global crisis we're seeing, from civilian casualties in Syria to ethnic cleansing in Myanmar to the caging of children on U.S. borders, it's critical that we expose the truth in order to defend the rights of all and bring those responsible to justice. Human Rights Watch does just that. They're an independent, nonprofit organization known for their accurate fact-finding, impartial reporting, and targeted advocacy. Often they do so in partnership with local activists and human rights groups. They accept no money from any government, but rely on the support of informed, dedicated people just like you. You've heard us reference Human Rights Watch on this program countless number of times over the years. So if human rights are important to you, visit hrw.org/majority. That's hrw.org/majority to make a donation and support its vital work around the world. When you do, not only is your gift tax deductible, it will be matched dollar for dollar until 2019. That means your donation will go twice as far to advance justice and defend the basic dignity of people who need it most. Again, that's hrw.org/majority. So Donald Trump out in California. Here he is with Gavin Newsom, the California governor elected, I guess lieutenant governor as well. Jerry Brown. I'm not sure who the third person is in camera frame here, but it is Trump is. This is a stunning example of someone who resents California because that's where all the votes came to make him lose the general election tally. And California has the power on things like cafe standards and whatnot to push back on Donald Trump. And someone who knows nothing about what he's talking about but feels obligated to pretend that he does. This is a sick individual. But let's hear him. Here he is.
And I know Gavin's committed. We're all committed. I'm committed to make sure that we get all of this cleaned out and protected. Got to take care of the floors. You know, the floors of the forests. Very important. You look at other countries where they do it differently, and it's a whole different story. I was with the president of Finland, and he said we have a much different. We're a forest nation. He called it a forest nation, and they spend a lot of time on raking and cleaning and doing things, and they don't have any problem. And when it is, it's a very small problem. So I know everybody's looking at that to that end, and it's going to work out. It's going to work out well.
Yeah, all the adults surrounding him are thinking, this guy's a complete, total moron. For one reason, he's a total moron, is this. This is the average climate of May to October in Finland and California. The red signifying California, the blue, Finland. The numbers on the left, is that the y-axis, is the average precipitation totals between May and October in inches of rain.
Might have something to do with how they rake the floors.
Yes. You will notice that the precipitation in Finland versus California is almost 7 times greater.
And the raking is about 7 times greater as well.
Right. It makes the raking easier. That's the whole point. Because things are looser and you don't, and raking water, there's no...
Maybe if you raked more in California, you'd get more rain.
I would also add that the, is it the Prime Minister of Finland? Has no recollection of that conversation. The president. Reportedly, according to the AP, isn't sure where the U.S. President Donald Trump got the idea that raking is part of his country's routine for managing its substantial forests. The Finnish president said in an interview published Sunday that he spoke briefly with Trump about forest management on November 11th when they were both in Paris for Armistice Day's events. He said the conversation focused on California wildfires and the surveillance system Finland uses to monitor forests for fires. He remembered telling Trump we take care of our forests, but couldn't recall raking coming up. I mean, what are you going to say? The guy's a moron. All right, we have more of Donald Trump being a moron in a bit, but first we're going to take a break, talk to Michael D'Antonio, the co-author with Peter Eisner of The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. Good time to check in and just remind ourselves what a Mike Pence presidency might look like. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. on the phone. Oh, I'm sorry. We're back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program journalist, CNN contributor, author, Michael D'Antonio, author of the latest with Peter Eisner, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sam. Great to be with you.
Now, Michael, we met at Politicon this year on a panel about Mike Pence, and sort of more broadly, I guess, does the left want Mike Pence, or does somebody want Mike Pence to fill in for Donald Trump? And I was, I thought I knew about Mike Pence. I knew a little bit about Mike Pence, but you know a lot more. And you said something to me, and I want to start here, and then we'll work our way back and forward in Mike Pence's life. But you said something at the time that I found really disturbing, that upon being inaugurated, Mike Pence had become the most powerful Christian, I think you called him maybe a Reconstructionist in the history of the United States. Did I get that right? Or and if so, correct it. But tell us more about that.
Well, the actual term I used was supremacist, which is an even more disturbing concern. Sure, Reconstructionists imagine creating God's dominion on earth and believe that all that they do should be around evangelizing for Christ. But for a supremacist, it also has to do with taking over the government, installing what they believe are biblical values, kind of layering them on top of the Constitution. So in Mike's case, when he was starting out in politics, he would speak to crowds and talk lovingly of America's heritage when there were state churches. Well, in fact, there never were state churches, but there were colonial churches, and one of the main impetuses for the revolution was to get rid of state-sponsored religion. Mike thinks that's a really good idea, just as he thinks it's a really good idea to roll back marriage equality, to roll back reproductive rights. I think he would even like to see most forms of contraception outlawed as they were prior to the 1970s.
Wow. All right. Well, with that said, Michael, can we just ring you back up? We're getting a little bit of a buzzing on your line. We're going to try you. We're going to ring you right back up.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll be right here.
Okay, great. All right. Bear with us 1 second, folks. We're going to try. He's got a little bit of a problem with his phone, and we're just going to try and fix that. We will cut this off, of course, from the podcast. We'll be right back. Give us 1 sec. So, Michael, all right. So we have a Christian supremacist who is now. I mean, is he? All right. So, having established his bona fides as a Christian supremacist, and people understanding what that means, right? I mean, a would-be theocrat in many respects. Is he the most powerful? I mean, I guess vice president, right? You're up there.
Yeah, he's up there, and the thing is that there's not been someone so overtly committed to this religious idea of government ever before at this level in our politics. So certainly there have been Christian conservatives. John Ashcroft, as a senator and attorney general, was quite devoted to many of these ideas. But we've never had someone who could, in a moment, become president, and that's really one of the few things required of the vice president, is to be prepared to step in. And he's been preparing for this all of his life. And the people around him all say, well, when the moment comes, Mike will be ready. That's the phrase that they always use, Mike will be ready. And he has salted throughout the government his own folks. Donald Trump arrived in Washington without very many connections and certainly no experience in government. But he leaned on Mike Pence to help him come up with appointments to every department in the government, and often at the very highest levels, there are Pence people in charge who are, I think, more loyal to him than they are to the president.
All right. I want to put a pin in that and come back around to that. But that is the other aspect about this, that Pence is, in some respects, and maybe in some ways, and we'll come back around to this, is reminiscent on some level of Dick Cheney's relationship with George Bush. I don't think it's quite analogous, but the power dynamic in terms of personnel seems to me to be a little bit different than maybe we saw with Barack Obama and Joe Biden, or with Bill Clinton and Al Gore. But we'll circle back around to that. Let's go back into Mike Pence's history. A lot of people don't realize this, but Mike Pence was an AM talk radio host, a right-wing talk radio host. I should say I've got nothing against AM talk radio show hosts, based on my own pedigree. But what was, I mean, what was he doing before then? I mean, because this guy was, I think he billed himself as being Rush Limbaugh, but nicer, right?
Precisely. He would say, I'm a conservative, but I'm not angry about it, or that he was Rush Limbaugh on decaf. And he very much styled himself after Limbaugh. He tried to develop a strong radio voice, and he did develop that. He had a pretty strong personality, but the strength of it was this kind of all-American, I think of cornfields and flapping red, white, and blue flags. He wanted everybody to think that he was a nice guy. So he would say things that were quite radical. For example, he was a big advocate of prosecuting people in the military who formed relationships across rank. So there was a famous case of a woman officer who had an affair with a male officer, and he wanted her put in the brig. These are pretty extreme ideas. He was really worked up about the HIV/AIDS crisis. One of his first sponsors in the radio business, the owner of a radio station that he went on first, was a very wild-eyed preacher who had a lot of street protests against people advocating for equality back in the late 1980s, and was very out there in his radical statements about anybody who was different from him. And what's really fascinating about Mike is he didn't start out this way. He was born into a family that was traditional Irish Catholic. His parents and his grandparents were Democrats. They were really New Dealers. And he saw, I think, when he went off to college, that there was an advantage in being a right-wing evangelical Christian in rural Indiana, which was where he was from and where he would seek his first office.
All right, so yeah, let's talk about him as a congressman. Not terribly effective from a legislative perspective. Is that? That seems like, I mean, like an understatement. I mean, I guess you can't get worse than completely ineffective. But he seems to, from a legislative perspective, have been completely ineffective.
He was. I mean, he couldn't even get a law passed that went after the problem of child pornography. He was so ineffective in his entire time in Congress, which was 10 years. He didn't pass a single bill. Now, he did manage to elevate himself. first challenged John Boehner to be Speaker, and then sort of as a sop to the Christian right wing of the Republican Party, Boehner invited him into the leadership structure after he defeated him. So he was always about promoting himself, promoting his own power, and he was a reliable vote. So the NRA would have given him 100% grades. The Koch brothers and their organizations favored him. He was a great fundraiser, and this is something people failed to appreciate, is that he raised millions and millions of dollars that he didn't need, so he gave it away. And that's how you make friends in your caucus in the House of Representatives, is you raise lots of extra money, give it to your buddies, they use it in their campaigns, and then when the time arises and you're out campaigning either for, in this case, vice president or eventually president, and I think Mike will campaign for president, they're going to be on your side.
Describe how the development, the relationship with the Koch brothers developed, because the Koch brothers, maybe this is I shouldn't say this is incongruous in any way. I mean, on some level, I wrote a book in that era about the sort of the free market fundamentalists and just the fundamentalists that basically made up the Republican Party. But he brings them together in some way, Mike Pence does, in his relationship with the Koch brothers. I mean, he is really very much a Koch-funded politician, more than most, and particularly at that time, right?
Right. So this was the old Americans for Prosperity days, when they were one of the very first independent political action committees. They went around the country in 1999 looking for candidates who said the right things, had the right appearance. You know, they wanted good-looking people who stood for a really ferociously independent capitalism, would oppose environmental regulations, do everything that the Koch brothers wanted, and have the chance of getting elected. So among the first two were Jeff Flake and Mike Pence, both of whom succeeded. And they had a similar style. They were kind of blandly good-looking guys who offended almost no one on the stump. But if you listened carefully, what they were saying was pretty extreme. And they were reliable votes in that pro-business, anti-regulation arena throughout their careers. One of the strangest things that Mike did in this period was he had a column that ran in local papers, and he wrote a column saying that there was absolutely no evidence that there were health effects from smoking. Now, this was in 1999, so by then there were only about 300 papers that had established a firm connection between smoking and cancer. The number of deaths related to smoking were well established. But little known to many people was that not only was this a great anti-regulation position, you know, you could say that you were 100% against government regulation if you're standing up for tobacco, but Mike's family ran a chain of 200 convenience store gas stations where tobacco was a major profit source. So he's at one point standing up for the Koch brothers, but he's also standing up for his family's business and all the money that they were making on cigars and cigarettes and chewing tobacco every single day.
Well, Michael, I'm sure you're aware that charity starts at home.
Well, here's another funny thing that he has in common with Donald Trump. So you mentioned that he was a broadcaster, and this was before Trump was a broadcaster. And actually, Mike was on television in Indiana in addition to being on the radio. Long before Donald was on the boss on The Apprentice, Mike was the host of this TV show. But he also, his family went through one of the biggest bankruptcies in the history of the state of Indiana business. I believe that it was well over $100 million that they walked away from, leaving not only suppliers and vendors on the hook, but the state of Indiana. They were left with millions of dollars in cleanup costs at gas stations where the Pence companies had poured all kinds of things into the ground. So he's got both broadcasting and bankruptcy and all sorts of other tricks in common with Donald Trump. So there's not as much difference between them as people would like to believe.
So in the, I can't remember if it was the late aughts, mid-aughts, he leaves Congress to become, to run for governor. Must have been the late aughts, I guess, or maybe just in like 2010, is it? I mean, because he was an extremely, by the end of his first term, and he was going to try and run for re-election when he became vice president. He was unpopular. He was significantly unpopular, if I remember correctly.
He was. So he left 12 and ran for governor of Indiana then. A Republican in that state kind of starts out with a huge advantage because the registration favors them, and you almost have to try to lose, and he almost did lose. But he got into office and then proceeded to do all kinds of stuff that nobody liked. And one of the main things that he did that really alienated not only great swaths of the electorate, but the Republican establishment, was this thing called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. And what this was a law that said it's okay to discriminate on the basis of sexual identity. So if you were running a business and someone came in to buy invitations for a same-sex wedding or a wedding cake, or really if they had any view that was different from yours on a religious basis, you could refuse to serve them. And he actually got this through the state legislature and signed it. And the thing, everything sort of hit the fan when a picture from the signing ceremony, which was held in secret, was actually released. And if you looked at this photo, you'd see something that was kind of a modern-day Last Supper painting, with Mike seated at his desk with his pen in hand, surrounded by preachers and Catholic nuns and Orthodox Jewish people, all fully recognizable from their clothing. And the state erupted. You know, the conservative Indianapolis newspaper ran one headline on the front page, and it was in huge type, and it just said, "Fix this," because businesses were saying they were going to move out of the state. The NCAA was saying it was going to no longer hold tournaments in Indianapolis. It was a disaster, and he backtracked on it as quickly as he could.
And we should say, I mean, ultimately, the on a federal level, it was the federal RFRA that was almost like revived in some respects in the Hobby Lobby case. Where the ACA, where RFRA was basically used, if I'm not mistaken, as this sort of the leverage point in allowing for Hobby Lobby as a closely held business not to have to offer certain health insurance benefits to its employees because it was offensive to the owner's religion. Right. And so, go ahead.
Well, this was Mike being a little bit ahead of his time. You know, he wanted to do this by statute, and the case involving the ACA wound up being a Supreme Court case, and now it's more. There's more leverage for businesses that want to withhold either insurance coverage for contraception or if you don't want to bake a wedding cake, they have some standing to do so on religious grounds. But the law Mike pushed through in Indiana was much broader than that, and would essentially allowed anybody to refuse service to almost anyone else and claim that it was a religious cause.
There seems to be a series of instances like this where he overreaches and then has to walk it back, essentially. I specifically, I'm thinking about a situation where it was a case I had interviewed actually an attorney about it, where at one point he and his Department of Adoption Services, or I can't remember, like child welfare services in the state, basically cut the funding to foster parents or parents who adopt kids with special needs. There was no federal funding, and the state cut the subsidies in like 2009, I think it was. They ultimately were sued. He had to sort of reinstitute those payments. But what's going on here? Like what? There's just a series of these things. Because on one hand, that paints him as a guy who's like, I just am deeply religious, and I have these principles that are nuts to a large segment of the population, even in my home state. But I go forward until I'm slapped back. But then we have a vision of a far more mercenary guy, it seems to me, who has become vice president.
Well, you're right. And it's a good observation that on some of these cases, it does seem to be religiously motivated. But in other cases, it's this overstepping almost as a matter of wielding power and refusing to compromise. There were two really important examples of this while he was governor. One was a case in northwestern Indiana, which is up toward Chicago and tends to be Democratic, where there was a crisis similar to the Flint water crisis. It was primarily an African-American community where a industry had polluted the ground and the water so terribly that people were getting sick, and a huge housing project had to be shut down. And Mike refused to intervene, refused to give them disaster assistance, just insisted there was nothing wrong and that he did not have to act. There was another infamous case of a wrongful conviction and incarceration of a man for murder who all the evidence indicated he hadn't done it, and it was proven that he hadn't done it, and he was released, and he wanted his record wiped clean so that he would not have the conviction show up anywhere in his record. And Mike just flatly refused to do it, really for no good reason. And as soon as he was out of office, his lieutenant governor became governor and reversed him on both of those issues. So, and he was a good, regular Republican governor of the state of Indiana, and he saw no reason to hold on to these policies when clearly the people in East Chicago, which was the community that was affected by the pollution, needed to have that redressed, and the man who had been incarcerated had become a cause célèbre for the entire state. And what's amazing about this is it's sort of like the case with the border separations and Trump, where even Franklin Graham Jr. was saying, we can't abide this separation of these children and their parents. And Trump said, I'm still going to go forward with it. In Indiana, there were evangelical leaders who were telling Mike to change his position, and he just wouldn't.
So Mike Pence came to us via Paul Manafort, and I think there's a story that has been reported in multiple places that Manafort brought Trump in to look at Pence as vice president, that Trump was leaning towards Chris Christie, and Manafort pretended that the jet that brought Trump in was broken and that they had to stay overnight so that he would have more time with Mike Pence. I can understand the theory, right? Like Mike Pence, the theory was Mike Pence is going to deliver the evangelical vote, that the Trump essentially hiring Mike Pence as vice president was the metaphor. Like I'm bringing you folks into the tent. I will do your bidding, and therefore it's worth it for you to come out and vote for me, if only because of what I'll do with the Supreme Court, but more. I mean, is that basically the dynamic that was going on there?
That is the dynamic, and there is a whole theological backdrop for all of this, where people talk about the biblical story of Cyrus and the fact that as a non-believer king, he allowed a Jewish man to be his key advisor, and he protected the Jews in Cyrus's kingdom and encouraged Cyrus to act in a just manner and to therefore serve God. And this is taught in Christian right churches today, that Donald Trump is Cyrus, and Pence is the person who will moderate him and mediate on God's behalf and usher in the kingdom, despite the fact that there is this awful person in the Oval Office. So none of what Trump does, none of the sins that he's committed in the past, none of the outrages that he continues to commit matter, because Mike Pence has his eye on him. And Pence believes that he's destined to be president and that God intends for that to happen anyway. And I think most of the Christian right world assumes that this will be the case too. So he's in this caretaker position, kind of looking over Trump's shoulder. His obsequiousness, the fact that he's the sycophant in chief, is all part of the game. It doesn't matter how much he degrades himself, how much he grovels in front of Trump's awfulness. He's there for one purpose, and that's why the Christian right is going to remain loyal to the president.
There's a little bit of that, like lying for the Lord quality to that.
Absolutely, that's a concept that is very current in the conservative Christian movement, and popes have subscribed to this as well, that any amount of deception for the right purpose is somehow permissible. So the ends justify the means, even among the pious.
Let's, because I want to get to just like how much of an actionable plan do you think Mike Pence has to assume the presidency? I want to get to that in a second. But before we do, let's talk about the personnel in the White House, because I look at like this guy, Matt Whitaker, who has been who went from chief of staff for Jeff Sessions to now the acting attorney general. And this guy, when his whole sort of biblical reference for the law and a litmus test for judges need to be Christian, and the story that Whitaker came not from Jeff Sessions, but from outside of Jeff Sessions and was more or less installed there and became Donald Trump's eyes and ears, it occurred to me that he sounds like maybe he came from Mike Pence, because it doesn't sound like this guy came from anywhere else. I mean, do you have a sense of that? Like, how many people in the White House now are Pence people that we're not really clear about?
Well, there are people in the White House, most notably this fellow Nick Ayers, who is right now Mike Pence's chief of staff, but is in the running to replace Kelly as the president's chief of staff. But more important where Pence is concerned are the people who are cabinet secretaries. Someone like Ben Carson is more a Pence loyalist than a Trump loyalist. The people at Department of Agriculture, HHS, Alex Azar, was Pence's guy in Indiana for Health and Human Services. You can go down a long list of people, not only in the administration, but people who have been named to be federal judges whose pathway to these appointments is through the vice president's office. In fact, a lot of the judges have been vetted not in the West Wing, but by the vice president's office. So there's this very much a kind of shadow administration that serves Donald Trump. And, you know, the other thing to consider is that Trump's not much interested in this stuff. He's not a guy who cares much about policy. He, you know, when he says that he doesn't know who Matt Whitaker was, well, that's a lie. You know, it just chalk that up to one of the half a dozen lies a day that he commits. But I'm sure he doesn't really care who Matt Whitaker was in the past, only that he saw him on Fox TV trying out for the role by saying that Mueller's off the reservation and needs to be reined in, and that the investigation is based on nothing and is a fraud. So he made it clear to the president where he stood. As a guy from Iowa, I think Whitaker would have been on Pence's radar. Years ago, before Donald Trump even considered running for president in 2016, Mike Pence was working in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina to develop his primary and caucus state contacts for his own run for president. So Whitaker would have been on his radar, as would have been Sam Clovis, who's another controversial figure in the Department of Agriculture and is Whitaker's buddy in Iowa.
Right.
So there is this reality that you're going to find more connections between Pence and the players in the Trump administration that go back deeper than for the president and any of these figures.
How much of a plan do you imagine that Mike Pence has to become president? I mean, or let me delineate it this way. Obviously, he is contemplating the idea of running as a sitting vice president, maybe in 2024, right? Does he have a plan? And I imagine he's, ready if the Lord decides that Donald Trump needs to go in some fashion. That Pence is ready to step in. But do you think that Mike Pence, like when we saw that letter that was released weeks before the midterm elections from an anonymous source within somewhere in the administration, I doubt it was Mike Pence writing this thing, but to what extent do you think that he had any close proximity to the writer or awareness that this was going to be written? A, and B, that's another way of asking, like, does Mike Pence also have maybe we can expedite this or have the chips fall in a certain way plan?
Well, he's a pretty ruthless guy. For all of his milquetoast exterior and claiming to be so nice and promoting the president, when he sees his opportunities, he grabs them. And I would be very surprised if the vice president didn't know that anonymous letter was coming. And I really have to assume that he knows who wrote it. And is not unhappy about the fact that it was published. He's currently in Asia and the Pacific, representing the president at various meetings, and he's made it clear there that he disagrees with Trump when it comes to the press as the enemy of the people. He has cultivated some space between himself and the president, and a niche that suggests that he's a little bit more normal and that he's an alternative to Trump, maybe even a transition figure back toward politics as it regularly was before this great disruption. So I think he's constantly positioning himself. He created his own super PAC in May of 2017, 5 months into the vice presidency. No one ever did that before. He's raised huge sums of money. He spent more time on the road talking to local Republicans than the president has, and we know how much he enjoys going around doing rallies. So his network continues to develop and grow. The expectations for him in the future are greater than they ever were. I actually think Nikki Haley left the United Nations to prepare herself to be on a Pence-Haley ticket in 2024. So we've not seen anything yet from Mike Pence.
Wow. Well, seems like a good place to wrap this up. Michael D'Antonio, the book is The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. You know what? Before we go, I got to ask this, okay? What there are, I think people not of the fundamentalist ilk look upon Mike Pence's relationship with his wife as, at the very least, anachronistic, I guess, right? And what do we know about Mike Pence? Like how, I think there's a facile response to that. Like Mike Pence, is really, really concerned about, maintaining control over his sexual urges, which may be, all over the place to a certain extent. Is there anything beyond the fact that that in the course of your reporting that Mike Pence is anything other than, more or less the type of guy who would walk out of The Handmaid's Tale?
Well, he's obviously a very repressed guy. There's so much effort being made at containing and controlling his sexuality, his emotions, that you have to think that there's some fear there, that he's worried about those aspects of being a human being. When he asked Karen to marry him, he told friends that he had to forgive her for not being a virgin because she had been married before. So this goes way back. I think his fear of passion and sexuality and perhaps women is well established. I think the president's fear of women is well established. That's why he's so angry at them and tries to belittle women at every chance he gets. Beyond that, I think that the Pences have this meeting of the minds where she's every bit as ambitious as he is. He respects her judgment politically, and in a lot of ways, it's sort of like surprise, surprise, Bill and Hillary Clinton. They're a power couple. They've pursued these ambitions together, and I think she takes every bit as much pleasure from the exercise of power and the achievements that he's notched in his career as he does.
That's interesting. I just saw a screening of Vice about Dick Cheney, and the relationship between Lynn Cheney and Dick Cheney is every much as much a shared venture. In some respects, Dick Cheney, by the account of this film, is a Lynn Cheney project. It's striking in many respects. But Michael D'Antonio, the book is The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, folks. Going to head into the fun half, wherein we will play. Well, let's play one more clip of Donald Trump being a complete just moron. I mean, I can only imagine the sense of, someone like Jerry Brown walking around being a normal human being, and all the other people there, obviously, as well, being a normal human being, being aware of the human suffering that's going around, being aware of the implications of climate change and how it is likely that what they're witnessing is not a one-off incident, but a continuance of a trajectory and a glimpse into the future of what's going to be going on in California. And then to be sitting there with this moron who has no human empathy, but an intense desire to appear as if he knows what he's talking about, but exercising not even the slightest bit of effort to do so. I've been in some rather uncomfortable situations where I've been sitting around people I don't like, but I've never had to do this, frankly. Here he is. This is him talking about him being in pleasure, right? Is that it? Yeah. They're in a place called Paradise, California. Here is Donald Trump trying to remember that.
You don't really see the gravity of it. I mean, as big as they look on the tube, you don't see what's going on until you come here. And what we saw at Pleasure, what a name right now. But what we just saw, we just left Pleasure. Paradise. Or Paradise. And what we just saw at Paradise is just, it's just not acceptable.
Right. Pleasure, Paradise. Two different...
You can see why I'd make the mistake.
It starts with a P. It starts with a P. Here is Donald Trump also showing his ignorance as to, he's already earlier said, Finland doesn't have this problem. Why do we have this problem? Finland, like we already expressed, has 2 to 3 times more precipitation. Or no, was it 7 times more precipitation during the months of May to October, which will, for those of you who are Trump supporters, that much rain and precipitation will make the starting of forest fires that much less likely, and the intensity of those fires much less so, because things aren't as dry. Here is Donald Trump addressing the likelihood that climate change has implications for creating essentially really dry environment in California that would lead to intense forest fires.
Does seeing this devastation, though, change your opinion at all on climate change, Mr. President?
No. I have a strong opinion. I want great climate. We're going to have that, and we're going to have forests that are very safe, because we can't go through this every year. We go through this, so we're going to have safe forests, and that's happening as we speak.
You said there need to be changes in fire management. Should the state and local officials have been done?
No, we're going to work together with the federal government. No, state, local, and federal government. Federal government's going to work with the state and local, and we're going to help them with funding. And it's going to take a lot of funding. I will tell you.
Should they have done things differently before this point?
A lot of things have been learned. And they've been working very hard. And I think you're going to see something very spectacular over the next number of years.
This guy has one macro for all these things. We're going to have great climate. It's already, the climate's getting better.
That's his favorite mode. This is the same mode he was in when he was throwing paper towels out in Puerto Rico.
Strutting around, getting to wear the coat, the USA hat.
It's so much about containment for him as well. Like the idea that we can make safe forests.
We're going to have a safe forest, right. The forests are going to be great. They're going to be safe. It's happening. It's already happening. We're probably I would say probably 3 weeks. 6 to 3 weeks, 3 to 6 weeks. Great forests, happy, safe forests. And he, in that moment where he's close to Jerry Brown, right? Lessons have been learned. Nobody knew about fires until I became president.
It's a constant balancing act between saying what he even he knows he should be obligated to say, and also covering his own tracks.
Yep. All right, folks, just a reminder, this program relies on its members for its very existence. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. By becoming a member of the program, you are supporting this show. You are making it possible for us to have interviews. We had a lot of great response from the interviews we had last week. That was one of my favorite weeks, I have to say. Yochai Bankler on what the media has been up to, and John Sides on the implications of race in our country following Obama, and Marcy Wheeler. Covered all bases last week. Really great stuff. The best interviews. And we're going to have even better interviews. They're going to just get better.
A lot of things were learned.
A lot of things were learned, and we're going to have a lot better ones in like 3 to 6 weeks.
Everyone knows that, and it almost wouldn't even have to be said.
That's right. But you can support this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. And as a way of saying thank you, we give you extra content every day. So if there is one of those rare times where you find the interview too dry, too weedy, I know I have a tendency to do that. People have told me that, sometimes repeatedly, over and over. Some people have told me that. But that's just the way that we do it here.
It's kind of like that chart that we just showed earlier with the Norway, California. It's dry. There's some drier stuff.
There's some drier stuff.
There's
That's
some
right.
More wet stuff.
More wet stuff. But, yeah, I mean, I've been told in the past, like, you should do the fun half as the free show in the interviews, but no, it's not the way I want to do it. So you can support the show by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, you can see us live. We're still debating about guests. January 13th in Brooklyn, New York, we will be at the Bell House. We have a link on the majority.fm and in the podcast, and we'll put it down below in the YouTube as well. Part of the Brooklyn PodFest. Tickets are only $15. It is 18 and over. So if you're a young person, come to the show. And we may have guests, we may not. Not sure. But does it matter? Does it really matter? Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code, get 10% off with the coupon code majority. TMBS put out 2 shows this week, or last week. So go catch up on that. You can get it as a podcast on where all your podcasts are delivered, or you can go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Sam Seder, watch the full show, clips on the TMBS channel, and obviously head over to Patreon too if you want to support that program. The Antifada.
They had a giant episode.
That was the guy who'd gone undercover on the alt-right, right?
I don't even know if that's the most recent one.
Oh, well, Patreon.com/the Antifada. Literary Hangover.
Yeah, another episode on Catherine Maria Sedgwick. We look into there's a common thing in colonial times where colonialists would go into Native American tribes and they would stay there, and it wouldn't so much happen the other way around because apparently the lifestyle was just better or something like that. You have to infer. Catherine Maria Sedgwick had an ancestor who was captured by Native Americans and then married into it and stayed a Native American. She preferred it. So we talk a little bit about that and about the rest of the story.
Check that all out. Head into the fun half, 646-257-3920. Oh, I'm going to talk about a libertarian debate that we're going to have coming up too. We will talk about that in the fun half, 646-257-3920. See you there. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. Are you nervous? You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good.
Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
Do.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Wow.
Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. Fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Fun half. Orthodox Donut on the IM. Sam, as someone adjacent to show business and a Jewish man, what is your reaction to Ice-T's recent claim that he's never eaten a bagel? I mean, I'm skeptical.
Well, I had a bit of controversy when Cynthia Nixon had her whole lox and cream cheese thing, because I've ate a bagel like out of a bag before, but I've never went to a bagel shop and bought a bagel.
All right, here's why it's not necessarily the same. You are at least half of Ice-T's age, I would say. Well, I don't know. Maybe you're about half. And Ice-T is also, he's been on many sets before.
Okay, yeah.
Right? He gets there for breakfast. I got news for you. There's bagels.
I've only been on Mob Wives.
Yeah, you've only been on reality shows, and craft services there very, very thin.
I wasn't even.
So that's my take. I don't buy it. I think it's a pose.
Have you ever seen the
Nope,
Law and
never
Order?
have. Never seen it.
The Law and Order spread?
Never heard of it.
It's amazing.
Never even heard of Law and Order. Why? Was Ice-T on that? I would never even heard of that show.
Fun fact, his name was actually Finn on...
Wow. Of course,
That's a Finn fact.
Vespa, when is David Pakman's takedown piece for stealing your background panels going to air? Talk about competition starting to kick in. He asked me how to make them. I know. I probably shouldn't have said anything. Can we get... Let's see a Pakman thing up here. All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. You really jumped in, got in early today.
Well, the phones were closed early. I tried calling at like 6:30, but you just opened them up, which is really helps the free market, I think.
Yeah, none of this like get up at 6 hours before the show and get on the phone. Plus, to be honest with you, we get charged. We get charged for that time. So I'm becoming
is that true?
I'm getting more diligent about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you there. Hey, I need to ask you about Arby's.
Yeah. Okay. Arby's.
So
hold on for 1 second. We're looking at David Pakman's panels. He really did. He stole the show. He stole it.
Yeah. Well, fuck Pakman. I think we know that.
Wow. What's he going to do
I've been saying
next?
it for years. I've been saying it for years, frankly.
Oh, this guy.
But
Wow.
whatever.
All right. Okay. Whatever. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Listen.
Yeah.
I need some information because you're Hollywood adjacent, I would say.
Right.
What do you think Benjamin's getting for these Arby's commercials?
I think he's doing probably.
What's the payout? Be specific, please.
You want me to be specific about the payout? Well, let me say this.
Yes.
Let me say this. All right. This is as far as I'll go. I have not paid for a meal with John Benjamin in quite some time. Let me put it that way.
Right. But, okay, that supports my theory that he was probably already a rich guy before Arby's came along. And so would you do an Arby's commercial, Sam?
Would I do an Arby's commercial?
Yes.
For the money that he's getting, would I do an Arby's commercial? I would seriously consider it, and then I would probably do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
me too.
It's very.
Me too.
I don't think I would do. There are some brands I would not do. Like, it would have to be for a significant amount of money.
What would you not do? What would you not do?
I wouldn't.
What if Subway came and they said we want you to be the new Jared?
If they put it that way, I would probably say no. But if they said, "Would you sell like a turkey sandwich?" Sure, yeah. But I wouldn't do like finance. I wouldn't do,
gold.
I wouldn't do gold. No, I mean, I've turned down a lot of these in terms of ads. Now, I will say this. Not for the money that would come with a national Arby's spot, let's say, but
now there's a picture of you on the internet with Benjamin and David Cross,
right?
And you're wearing like a pink shirt and you look really confused,
right?
You have like a confused look on your face.
It's possible.
And so Benjamin is now the face of Arby's. And David Cross is in a M&M's commercial.
Is he?
And I just feel like, yeah. And I feel like I need some Seder on something,
Yeah.
Geico.
I would do. Is that the picture?
Yeah.
Is that the picture? I don't.
I'm not. Yeah.
I don't know where that picture is. Look at how young everybody looks in that picture. Oh, my God. I went out actually with those two guys for a drink the other night. I didn't pay. So that's the only thing I care about. I mean, frankly, I didn't have to pay. So, no, look, I'm with you. I would love to get, but I just don't think that's going to happen. But I do appreciate the encouragement, Ronald Reagan.
Oh, I wanted to ask you one more thing. So there's all these rumors online about you running in 2022 against Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, let me address your assessment of all these rumors.
Crazy.
It's pretty crazy.
It's crazy.
My sense of those rumors is that they're all being made up and spread by you.
No, dude, they're all over Twitter. Have you been on Twitter lately?
I have been, and as far as I can tell,
a lot of them are me.
Yeah, a lot of them. But now other people are. Yeah. Well, listen. You know what? I mean, I'm not going to rule it out. Let's put it that way.
I've got a focus group meeting later, and I need you to do me a favor. Can you look straight into camera and say the Chuck stops here, and then say I'm Sam Seder and I support this message?
Sure.
I just want to see how it plays.
No, I
My
understand.
focus group. Okay, go.
The Chuck stops
say
here. I'm sorry. What? You said it right in the middle of my. Can you let me just do it?
Okay, do it over. Sorry. One more time from the top.
The Chuck stops here. I'm Sam Seder, and I approve of this message. How's that?
Okay.
All
Well,
right,
I'll get back to you with their
Get
feedback.
back to us.
You need to do like the ready for Hillary, but ready for Cedar.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I want mine to be a little bit less about people are ready for me, and I'm ready for them. But we'll talk about that after
Can
you're
you
done
do
with the
another?
focus. No.
Can we do?
No, I can't. I've done one. I've done one for your focus group today. You know, this is the problem with politics. That it's all focus group driven. And Ronald Reagan already, it's like what happened in The Candidate. The campaign manager comes in and starts to corrupt the guy. Ronald Reagan's already doing that. I haven't even declared yet, and he's already getting me to tailor myself to a focus group. Reagan. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. Good to hear from you. Is this going to be about the race against me and Chuck Schumer?
Not necessarily. I put out the counties that I thought you would do well in on Twitter, so if people want to look that up.
I was surprised you
do
didn't
pretty
say,
well in the north.
I was surprised you didn't say Columbia County on that. I noticed that, but whatever, that's fine.
Okay, well, I mean, I think you'll actually would win most of the counties. I mean, the real issue would be the 5 boroughs, Suffolk County, Nassau County, Westchester, some of the other ones near there. I mean, that's 2/3 of the votes. That's right. Where all the people, the progressives didn't do so well, except for Jumaane Williams did pretty well because he was actually from Brooklyn.
Right.
The other ones did, Teach Out and the Nixon didn't do so well in the 5 boroughs. Anyway, so I know you already covered this earlier in the day, but I do feel it's important. On Thursday, the Washington Post reported a new rule that Nancy Pelosi wants to implement. It requires a 60% supermajority to pass any legislation that raises taxes on people who aren't in the top 20% of all earners. Friend of the Majority Report, Eric Levitz, wrote an excellent article in New York Magazine where he proclaims while progressives are committed to increasing the discretionary income of the bottom 80%, this does not necessarily mean that keeping their tax rates at historical low levels. A bill has been required. A bill that required these households to pay a new, smaller sum to the government, such as to fund single-payer system that would reduce the cost of living by delivering a radically cheaper health care services, could hardly be called regressive, Levitz notes. And the same can be said for legislation establishing universal health care, paid family leave, or any other program aimed at easing the middle-class financial burdens. Equating support for middle-class families with opposition to increasing their tax rates is a conservative project which Democrats have no business advancing. If the party wishes to establish structural barriers to policies that would hurt the middle class, why not require 3/5 majority to cut Medicare,
That's what
Medicaid,
yes.
and Social Security?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if we were talking like you're not going to raise taxes on the bottom 20%, let's say, and the people in the lowest quintile of income, I would that's fine. But to say that we're not going to raise any taxes in there is exactly as Levitz states it. It is basically like a fail-safe to make sure that you can't get any type of universal programs passed. And it's absurd. It's silly. It's dumb. It's just a way. Well, it's not dumb. I mean, I understand why she's doing it. It is to allow Democrats from having to take a difficult vote. And here's the problem, okay? The Democrats have to now, Nancy Pelosi's thinking is like, how can we maintain the House? The Democrats have to get with the program and understand the way this stuff works is you take the power and you use the power, even if it means you're going to lose the power. And that's not to say that you should be taking a Medicare for all vote, in the next 2 years because it may not mean anything, although I don't think that's a hard vote. You could take the vote and then you do the taxation later, right? You come up with the means to pay for it when you can actually implement the policy. But the one thing that we've seen from the Affordable Care Act, it seems to me, is once you get this stuff in, stuff that people are going to like, even if they don't like it as much as they would like something else, beyond it, right? Because the ACA was a step at least in the right direction, particularly in terms of the patient protection. And I've been saying this for 2 years, and they just ran, Nancy Pelosi, when she announced that she was taking over the House, said, let's hear it for pre-existing conditions. The point being that the patient protection part of that bill has always been the most successful part of it. Once you institute these programs, particularly if it's something that's universal, it's going to be extremely durable. So you can lose the House because you get Medicare for all, and it's going to help you get back the House. But even at that point, Medicare for all would go a long way to make people's lives that much better and create a fact on the ground, as it were, that is really important. So, yeah, John, I think it's worthwhile to bring that up consistently. And I would beseech you, please revise your estimation of what's happening in Columbia County if I take on Schumer. Thank you for the call.
All right. Thank you, Sam.
Bye, John. I don't understand why I didn't even contemplate Columbia County. So on Twitter, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but I just want to briefly touch on it. I would like to debate Steven Crowder. In fact, I'd like to debate any of these right-wing YouTube people. Some I'm willing to, ones that have a sort of substantial sway over segments of our population, I am willing to,
the ones that are doing damage.
The ones that are doing damage, from my perspective, it's a subjective call, but their ideology is all damaging, but some have more traction than others. I'm willing to travel to their studio. I'm willing to call into their show. I'm willing to host them on my show. I'm willing to go to a third place. And certainly, if you're a conservative YouTuber out there, the phone lines are always open. And more often than not, we check Twitter sometimes. And if you're a conservative, YouTuber and want to debate me on some topic, tweet at us and tell us that you're on the line and give us your area code, and you'll get to the front of the line. Believe me. So this was going back and forth, and apparently Adam Kokesh, who we used to talk about in this program, a little bit. I mean, I'm familiar with his work, but from like years ago. From Adam, I can't remember. He had a show name. It just escapes me at the moment. That's just my old age. And he somehow got involved in a thread, and he's a hardcore libertarian. And I think quite earnest one. And he tweeted at me and said, I just found out that you have a standing thing to debate libertarians. And so he said, I'd like to debate you. And it took me, it took me about 4 seconds after seeing it. I don't know how long he had tweeted it. Maybe it had been an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours or a day ago or something. But I've DM'd him. We've exchanged information. We're going to have him on, probably calling in. I don't know where he lives, but calling in sometime in December to do a debate on libertarianism. And, I don't know if he's going to look at, stuff I've done about libertarians. I mean, I think our arguments are probably set. I imagine I have a sense of what he's going to say, and he has a sense of what I'm going to say. But in honor of the fact that we'll be having one of the first sort of scheduled libertarian debates that we've had in a while in December, I give you Utah's Senator Mike Lee. Now, here's the thing. Now that there is, and we will find out, there's a runoff election in, is it Mississippi? Mike Espy and I can't remember the Republican.
Cindy Hyde-Smith.
Yeah, Hyde-Smith, who has a real affinity for talking about lynchings and whatnot, hangings, public hangings. But as it stands now, with Bill Nelson having conceded this weekend in Florida, Republicans have I think a 53 to 47 advantage. 53 to 47 advantage. Or I should say 52 to 47 advantage. It could end up being 53, I think, with this one in Tennessee, but who knows? It could go the other way. A guy like Mike Lee gives him a little bit more breathing room to strut a little bit of his libertarian ideals. Because as, people's vote becomes less crucial, they can brand themselves a little bit more. Right? Susan Collins is released. She can pretend that she cares about a woman's right to choose more now than she did when she was absolutely needed for a vote on Kavanaugh. So here is Mike Lee giving a speech to the Federalist Society. This is the ones that developed guys like Kavanaugh.
This is the one who asked the moms.
Yeah, ask the moms. Here he is talking about how the left is going to start a civil war in this country unless they give up things like a federally mandated highway system or other functions of our government.
According to any reasonable measuring stick, the dysfunctional status quo is unsustainable, even in good times like those we're experiencing right now. It's driving our government toward insolvency and our politics toward violence. Realistically...
Pause it. I know people get annoyed when I interrupt sometimes these videos, but our government does not have the ability to be insolvent. You understand that, right? Our government does not have the inability to be insolvent unless it decides it wants to be insolvent. We have the ability to print money. We have the largest, or I should say the most meaningful economy in the world. Obviously, China is very important as well. But our currency essentially works all around the world. We have a very robust economy. We have the ability to print our own money. We also have the ability to tax people. It is impossible for the government of the United States to be insolvent. But continue.
Realistically, Americans have two options. Either we're going to once again embrace the Constitution's vision of a diverse, tolerant, pluralistic union of states and of communities, each governed according to the values and priorities of its own citizens. Or this fundamentally un-American contest, one recklessly designed to determine which half of our nation will have the power, at least temporarily, to unilaterally impose its will and its values on the other half, will escalate violently out of control.
Pause it. I want you to understand how nuts of what he's talking about is. First of all, it is completely an American concept. Like the Constitution suggests that Congress, right, will control things like commerce, interstate commerce, and has responsibility for the general welfare. Mike Lee doesn't, I don't think, have a problem with immigration, for the feds doing immigration either. But continue. Let's just listen to this absurdity. He wants us to go back to an era, let's say, where states could say, come up with their own voting laws about who can and cannot vote based on things, let's say, like by race or by a poll tax or a literacy test, right? Or maybe even who can and cannot own slaves.
Also, they don't have half of the country on their side. It's not half and half. This isn't half split popularity-wise.
He's saying that the majority will impose its will on the rest of the country. But yes, in terms of population, that's right. But continue.
Control. Ultimately, this will come down to a binary choice. A simple binary choice. Federalism or violence. Many on the left don't seem too concerned about any of this. They believe demographic and historic trends, coupled with what many see as the inherent rightness of their leftist cause, make their ultimate victory over Red America inevitable and morally justifiable. They believe every lever of federal power will one day soon and permanently be in their hands. They are content with nonstop political total war because they're sure they're going to win it, blind to the fact that such a victory would come at the expense of the American experiment itself.
Pause it. Now, just to understand what he said, this is a threat. This is a threat.
Like a secession threat.
No, it is a civil war threat, right? I mean, he says we have two choices. One is to embrace the system of government, the neo-Confederate, essentially, policies of allowing the states to function as completely autonomous fiefdoms. Or there's going to be violence. That's the choices that we have, America, according to this senator.
Unless or until this changes, unless or until we change this, it therefore falls to conservatives to chart a new course. Not simply to turn away from disaster, but to turn America toward something better, toward a genuinely happy and sustainable future, one of tolerance and diversity of viewpoint.
That's it. There's my diversity of viewpoint. Either you start letting states discriminate and create a race to the bottom in terms of protections for consumers and workers and citizens, or there's going to be violence. Let's hear more of this lunatic's ravings.
The low-hanging fruit is obvious. The interstate highway system, K through 12 public education, the federal higher education accreditation cartel, early childhood education, the Department of Commerce, the huge glut of federally owned land and real estate, housing policy, workforce regulation. These and the knotty interconnected problems of welfare dependence and health care would all be more easily untied if 50 diverse and motivated states were working on them. 50 diverse states where, by the way, populations disperse differently. Healthcare is provided differently in each locality, and each state has more of an ability to decide what solutions will most benefit their respective populations. In Washington, because...
Pause it. I want you to understand what he's saying here. He's saying get rid of things like the federal highways, which connect people. Now, I don't know if he's talking about on a practical level or on some misunderstanding of the Constitution, right? But just imagine you could have completely different standards in the 50 states across the country for the highways that connect them.
Those Wisconsin cheese highways, I think, would be pretty cool.
And all the diversity that it represents. You know, folks, people who live in Wyoming, their health care could be radically different than the health care of people, let's say, in New Jersey. Because in Wyoming, they have two hearts in every human being. What's funny, of course, is the idea that he'll also say, like, well, you should let health insurance companies sell across state lines to increase efficiency and competition. Now, A, it's funny because they already can do that. But B, they seem to understand the concept of size and risk pools, cutting costs. I mean, heck, How is it that Walmart manages to sell their stuff in Michigan and in, let's say, Georgia? How do they do that? It's nuts. Oh, I know how they do it. Through the federal highway system. Continue on.
In Washington, because of America's deep red-blue divide, these are very controversial issues. They're less so within our increasingly dark red and dark blue states. When there is no national consensus or federal imperative, there should not be federal law, especially if there is a greater degree of consensus within each state.
If everybody in my state agrees that we should have segregated water fountains, what business is it of the federal government to tell us that we can't? I think that's the conversation we would have been having 50 years ago.
Like, they're always afraid of tyranny of the majority, except at the state level, where it becomes more acute.
Right. Then the tyranny of the majority, as long as it's done by the state. That is the perfect unit, or really the county. I mean, why not the county? Why shouldn't we do this by the county? Or what about municipalities? Like, if that theory works so well about the states, why wouldn't we just do this down to the neighborhood?
I should be able to control my own home, Sam.
Well, I mean, honestly, like what? It's completely arbitrary. It's completely arbitrary, just based upon, and this is what libertarianism seems to always boil down to. We're going to reduce, or we're going to land on an idea of government and the most appropriate size of government that maintains the order of power that I benefit from. Tends to be really the operating principle of libertarianism. But we will have more time to discuss that in the future, indeed.
Like, these guys are basically setting out to make sure democracy can't overrule capital and property. That's right.
And we're just going to find the proper size of government that is going to allow for, we just need one or two places to be the drain so that everything flows down essentially from there. This guy, this is pretty rough. I guess Emma Vigeland from TYT went down to a Trump rally. Was this a Trump rally? Or
this was before the election.
This is before the election. Okay, and this is in Fort Myers, Florida. As you know, both now Andrew Gillum and Bill Nelson have conceded. Bill Nelson picked up about 2,000 votes in the manual recount, not enough. Here is that Trump MAGA rally. This is from October 31st. We just came across this. It's a pretty impressive tattoo that, I don't know, I guess guy's a little...
It's better than the Sam Harris tattoo.
It's not on his face. We'll say that.
America. Go Trump, go Trump, go Trump, go Trump, go Trump.
So that's Obama. That's Hillary Clinton. Who's that? Oh, down there, Osama bin Laden?
No, that's the Ayatollah Khomeini, and then the worst enemy of the United States is on top. Don't you know who that is?
On top,
George Soros. Who is the worst enemy of the United States.
So on your back, you got George Soros, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Ayatollah?
As negative, not positive.
Right.
You can see Michael the Archangel casting the demon into the abyss, and then you have below them the enemies of the United States and its Constitution.
Jesus.
So look forward to hearing him on the new Crooked Media podcast.
Right.
It reminds me of, I can't remember who said this, but it might be like Sartre or something like that, but talks about how the anti-Semite spends more of his time thinking about Jews than like Jewish people do.
Yeah.
And, like he literally put Obama and Hillary and George Soros on his back, like
with a tattoo. Yes.
Permanently.
As, like a 70-year-old man as well. That's a new tattoo.
Death cult. Death cult. That's what it is. It's a death cult. I mean, it really is an illness. Now, all the data shows that Donald Trump certainly hurt people, Republicans who are running for re-election. And that dynamic probably won't change for some time. However, this Ohio thing is nuts. And we talked about this in the context of North Carolina, too. There are some states that are just so incredibly gerrymandered that it is mind-blowing. This comes from Cleveland.com. The Ohio Republicans won the race for every statewide executive job from the governor on down this year. That's, Sherrod Brown won his race, but in every other statewide job, Republicans won. The Democrats ran much more competitive in total votes for the 116th the 116 Ohio House and Senate elections across the state. Republicans got just over 50% total of the vote. In fact, I've seen some indication, I haven't seen the latest numbers, but maybe they actually lost, like just got under 50%. They won 73 of the 116 state house races. They won in the congressional districts. They won 75% of the seats with just 52% of the overall vote. They have a super majority, even though they may have just crossed the 50% threshold. The implications of that, I think, are obvious in terms of what kind of legislation you're going to get. In the lame duck session, Ohio House passed a stand your ground law with enough votes to override a veto and a so-called heartbeat bill that would give the state one of the strictest abortion limits in the entire country. Now, the only thing that should give you any type of hope, although it's still incredibly disturbing, is that in 2015, Ohioans voted to reform the way the state house districts will be drawn beginning in 2021. And they did the same for congressional districts going forward. The votes for change were not close, each passing with more than 70%. So there will become a time where this redistricting will go away. In the meantime, the Republicans are trying to get whatever type of draconian bills passed and turn Ohio into a deeper red hellscape. But we see this in North Carolina, too, where the Republicans barely won 50% of the vote, and they got 10 out of 13 House seats. We see what happens in a state that actually redistricts in a way that is more commensurate with some measure of fairness. And in Pennsylvania, Democrats picked up 5 new seats, I think it is. So this is nuts. It's nuts. Do we have this county commissioner? This is in Kansas. There was a commissioners meeting last Tuesday in Leavenworth, Kansas. Or I should say Leavenworth, just outside of Kansas City. And apparently this county commissioner, Lewis Klemp, had taken issue with a project that was presented by a planning consultant who also happened to be the only black person at least that we can see on camera in this video. And, apparently this guy, Louis Klemp, had an issue with the development project. That he only had an issue with the development project itself. And he wants to make that absolutely clear to this consultant. He was recently, we should say, go ahead, listen to this. See how convincing he is.
Now, look, I don't want you to think I'm picking on you, because we're part of the master race. You know you got a gap in your teeth. You're the masters. Don't ever forget that. I passed that out the other day, and the lady said, I didn't think of that. I'm going to start passing that around. So I don't like A. I don't like B.
There you go. He just basically told this woman, I don't want you to think that I'm picking on you because we're part of the master race. You got a gap in your teeth. You're the masters. Don't ever forget that.
Little master race humor.
Can you imagine? Obviously, there's a lot of people in our audience who can imagine, who've gone through this type of stuff. But you are in what is theoretically, not just an extremely theoretically professional environment, but one that is public. And this guy is projecting all of his creepy, racist bullshit on you. And you're there to do a job. This is a guy who, a month after he was appointed to fill a vacancy on the commission, this is, I don't know, I guess maybe last year, right? He went on according to reports, a meandering, disjointed soliloquy about a number of racially incendiary topics like slavery, the Civil War, Reverend Martin Luther King, and exactly which historical figures are deserving of a national holiday. Not everybody does them all, because we have Robert E. Lee, Robert E. Lee, wonderful part of history.
He's part of the gap tooth guys.
We don't have Washington anymore. He may be removed anyway because he had slaves. Welcome to Trump's America, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to the phones. You're calling from a 650 area code. Who's this?
Hey, how's it going, Sam? This is Garrett calling from Sacramento.
Hello, Garrett. What's on your mind?
I'm in the area of the wildfires that we're having up in Paradise, and I'm from San Bruno, originally, where we had the gas pipeline explosion over there back in, I think, 2010. I had a couple buddies that passed away in that one. I have some friends that are up in Paradise right now, kind of suffering from that wildfire. And I've been looking at the whole PG&E issue and sort of their liability within causing the campfire.
And explain to people why they would have liability.
So they have started a number of fires throughout the years. I think, as people might know, California's been in a drought over the last 5+ years, and we've had a number of wildfires that have increased in size every year. We had initially one of the most tragic wildfires up in Santa Rosa back in 2015, and we had the Mendocino fire up in Mendocino County, and a lot of these are started by downed power lines that aren't maintained. The maintenance
people should know that PG&E is the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and I don't know the background on PG&E, but if it's anything like, let's say, what we see in in the East here, National Grid, you've got one big company that buys up a lot of smaller companies, and the first thing they do is they cut back on the sort of maintenance of lines and sort of go more towards a model that is literally putting fires out. Like when we see that something has gone awry, we go fix it, as opposed to sort of going around. I mean, it used to be that, Niagara which, was bought by National Grid, they'd come out and they'd cut trees that were impinging upon lines before there was a problem. And
and they do that with PG&E, but it's typically when it's a problem.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. They slightly change the threshold in which they will go out and do work. They will wait for it to become a problem. And it's far more efficient from a dollar standpoint, but it's not far more efficient when it comes to averting possible disasters. And particularly now when we're in an era, and we're going to be even more in an era, where the potential for disaster and the severity of those disasters is greater because of changes in our climate.
And so that kind of brings me into one of these legislations that has been recently passed. SB 901 is a California State Senate bill that was passed last year. And it had to do with the Santa Rosa fires, the San Bruno explosion. And I mean, they had dozens of fires just in 2017 that left 46 people dead, over 9,000 homes destroyed. And the California state legislature is concerned that PG&E will become insolvent. They'll have to go bankrupt due to the costs associated with penalties from causing these fires, from civil lawsuits, from penalties that they incur. So they passed this legislation that allows them to pass that cost on to consumers. And I just don't see I don't see how that's helpful when you look at the company. And I mean, they've taken regulation onto their own.
It's less than helpful because it's subsidizing essentially their cutting corners, and it's subsidizing.
Exactly, and it makes it dangerous for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't follow proper regulation. They go. So my dad teaches a lot of classes for firefighters on how to respond to hazardous materials. And what a lot of these companies will do, they just had one down in Imperial County that tried to do this. They'll try and create their own board and get state approval to have a company self-regulate themselves. So in Imperial County, it was several oil refineries that got together and said, hey, we want to be able to self-regulate this. And PG&E has approval in many areas of the state to sort of do their own thing. Last week, I had just in front of my own house gas leak, which, being from San Bruno is kind of scary to me. You know, I understand what can happen with that. And the way that they handled it just seemed so irresponsible. They let cars drive by while they were literally opening up the asphalt to open up this busted gas line. And they ended up having to run up and evacuate everybody in the area because of it. Because, well, hey, now we have this gas leaving and it's a combustion issue. And they just don't seem to follow the regulation, and they're more concerned with how it's going to affect their investors rather than the people that consume it.
Garrett, I appreciate the call.
Of course. Left is best. Thank you guys for doing your work. Long-time listener, and I appreciate what you do, Sam.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks for calling in. People, just to remind people, if they don't know what Garrett's talking about, the San Bruno gas leak explosion happened, I think it was in 2011, 2010, somewhere 2009, somewhere about 7-8 years ago. I think it was just before we started this show, maybe. I can't, I mean, there were a number of deaths, and it just blew up like a neighborhood. essentially. I don't remember other details of it, but I think it was right before we started the show. This is why, if you're going to allow the consolidation of these enterprises, you really start to lose any type of semblance of argument as to why the U.S. government should not be owning these, why these should not be government-owned entities. Our, infrastructure, it seems to me to be one of those things where it's just, we have proof, time and time again, proof that we can do this just as well, if not better. Or I should say, for the same amount of money, we can do it better, without a doubt. You just take the profit out of it. I mean, just those resources are just going to go back into providing it. And you cannot say that there's competition, because there is no competition. PG&E does not have any competition. And you can hire the same experts. Just don't need to provide shareholder returns. Calling from a 781 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey guys, it's Tim from Boston.
Tim from Boston. What's on your mind, Tim?
I am hoping that we can have a broader discussion with Jamie and maybe Michael as well. Maybe later in the week, unless they've all gone on vacation.
Jamie and Michael have flown the coop for the week. That is something that we're going to be talking about. The company-wide meeting is going to be, it's like right on the top of the list of things to discuss.
Brendan and I will fight about something then.
Yep.
So this is like a big concept that I'm hoping
Tim,
that we can explore.
All right, let's wait for them to return then. I appreciate the call, though.
Okay.
Well, it's best we'll save it for them. I appreciate the call. Calling from a 651 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Like, I don't want to spend 10 minutes
have it twice
anticipating what we're going to talk about in the future. Let's just do it. Calling from a 651 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, my name is Chris Lapaco. Yes, the Chris Lapaco. How are you?
The Chris Lapaco. Long time no hear from. How are you, sir?
I'm good, sir. Sorry I haven't called in a while. I've been growing a beard, so I've got a lot of stuff on my plate.
I understand. That's going to be very time-consuming.
For sure. I am also calling about the rumors that you might run against Schumer. I think it's a pretty good idea. And if you need anyone to hack his campaign, I know some friends in the Ashkenazi mafia that could probably help us out here. I'll do it. You have plausible deniability, okay? Don't worry about it.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but go ahead.
Exactly. I'm on the vegan train. I'll be real quick here. I'm on the vegan train, and I haven't eaten any meat or eaten any animal products basically in like 2 or 3 months. And it's Thanksgiving coming up. People are going to be eating lots of turkey and other animal products. And I would just like people, just for one day, anyone listening, when you go to Thanksgiving, don't bring any animal products. Just stop being mean to animals for one day. Bring some hummus and don't be an asshole. Okay? That's all I got, man.
All right. Well, thank you.
Have a good day.
The Chris Lapaco, already becoming an evangelist. 3 months. I'm going to need a little bit more time before you start evangelizing.
Especially
on Thanksgiving. Might want to start off with just like meatless Mondays. But yes, I mean, there's no reason not, if it's easy for you to do, and it's easy for everybody, more or less.
I usually bring potato chips.
To eliminate, some of this stuff. And you start there, and you start to weed it out.
At least go to your local poultry farm if you're going to eat a turkey. Get your mom to go to the local poultry farm.
Jonathan Armstead, I have a suggestion. I think the media does a disservice when they say, what if Obama had done this? Whenever Trump does something stupid, I think instead we should parrot the same talking points Fox News would have done to Obama, only apply them to Trump. Everything they said about Obama was based on him being from Chicago, Harvard education, for some reason, a Kenyan Muslim socialist. So we use that on Trump. For instance, with the Acosta White House ban, we say, how is this Queens thug want to do it? Ban someone who, like it was a Wharton School frat party? Well, as someone who respects the First Amendment and knows how to turn the other cheek, I think this is wrong, but I guess I'm better than a man with 5 kids and 3 baby mamas who lives in government housing. Lord, this racism is killing me inside.
I mean, that's the inherent weakness of hypocrisy arguments is, do you just say, well, if everybody's doing it, why let's just not care, or does it reaffirm the I guess, the norm being violated?
Right. I just don't know if, as people are receptive enough to structure it in that way, but maybe. I don't know. Class, that's so creative. I'm from Indiana, and loathing the Hoosiers have for him is a fairly unrivaled. Oh, this is referring to Mike Pence. It's tempered now that he's in Washington, but even Republicans have a bad taste in their mouth. I worked for the local public television station where he appeared numerous times during his governorship. I wasn't ever on set with him, but my female coworkers recounted very lecherous interactions that left them disgusted. Maybe Karen Mother Pence keeps him out of rooms alone with other women is to prevent an otherwise inevitable sexual harassment scandal. Grand old pirate. So let me get this straight. We're to take lessons from Finland on forest management, which will likely end up giving the timber from our public lands to private for-profit companies, but we are not to take lessons from Finland when it comes to socializing our medicine.
Oh, is that is that what Finland has more private forests?
Probably. They probably sell off more of their lumber.
That's a clever way to play off Trump's stupidity. Just have him talk about that, and the secret message is let's privatize forests.
White House press corps pretty upset about Michelle Wolf, huh? Yes, I guess they've picked somebody who's not a comedian.
Pretty boring historian.
The DX full. Good. I hope nobody goes. Now is the only time that I would be interested in going now.
It'd be boring.
Yeah, that's more my pace. Ola Campesinos. I see that Digby was very busy last week guesting on Nicole Sandler's and Brad Friedman's show in between your programs. Meanwhile, I also saw that your friend, Sarah Silverman, got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame a couple of weeks ago. I predict that David Cross and John Benjamin will get stars before you win another podcast award from iHeart whomever. Thank you, DX. Well, I appreciate that. Winnipeg Craig, his name is Finn. SVU is still running strong. Kentucky Fried Comed, there's a clip of SVU where Ice-T can be seen eating an everything bagel. Snowflake. Matt, you're wasting your life in NYC if you don't go to H&H regularly. Ice-T also said he has never had coffee, so there's that. Miami Dave. Sam, would you be supportive of Trump proposing to repeal the Telecom Act signed under Clinton so that all media isn't owned and operated by only a few? And alternative media would get a boost? I don't know if alternative media would get a boost, but absolutely. I would bring back the Sinn Fin laws in a heartbeat and more. I don't know that Donald Trump would ever do that. Here is Donald Trump. You know, for a while that we have, when we've covered Trump, there's been talk of there being some type of like Russian, Saudi, Israeli axis, I should say. Early on, I remember we had Dan Dicker on the show in the Trump administration, where he pointed out like if you were going to assemble a cabinet that was about the sort of petrodollar, this would be the one. It could also just be that Donald Trump has some type of deals with the Saudis. But he really, I hope, I gotta think that they're getting their money's worth, because he's really going the distance on trying to downplay the Mohammed bin Salman's role in the killing of Khashoggi. And the CIA, over the weekend, there was a leak that they had clearly found that MSB was involved, at least in terms of ordering the kill. Here is Donald Trump. Who knows?
We haven't been briefed yet. The CIA is going to be speaking to me today. We have not been briefed yet. As of this moment, we were told that he did not play a role. We're going to have to find out what they have to say. But we're taking a look at it. You know, we also have a great ally in Saudi Arabia. They give us a lot of jobs. They give us a lot of business, a lot of economic development. They have been a truly spectacular ally in terms of jobs and economic development. And I also take that, I'm president, I have to take a lot of things into consideration. So we will be talking with the CIA later and lots of others. I'll be doing that while I'm on the plane. I'll be speaking also with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
So, in other words, the reason why MBS did this, why they were bold enough to essentially lure a Washington Post columnist, a resident of the United States, a Saudi national who had been critical of the MBS regime, lure them back into an embassy in Istanbul, send a 15-person kill team to kill him, chop him up, to get him out of the remains of his body out of the country. The reason why they did this is because they were under the impression they could, that they would suffer no consequences internationally. And by internationally, I mean, of course, from the United States. I can't imagine where they got that idea. The only thing that they underestimated was the level of power the president has. And they may not have. I mean, they overestimated that he had the ability to quiet every, Republican senator. But this was just a bridge too far. But you can understand why they thought they could get away with it. It's because Donald Trump clearly communicated, like, do whatever you want. I don't care. Whatever it is that we have, some type of relationship between you, Trump Industries and you, is enough for me to say, whatever you do.
We touched the orb together.
I mean, he's doing it now. After the fact, after it's become incredibly controversial and costly to him, he's still doing it. So there's a good reason why they thought they could get away with this. And it is the same reason why Duterte, arrests journalists. Bolsonaro's, I mean, it's the same dynamic as to why I think, we had talked about the elite in Brazil, uninhibited by the implications of them electing a fascist, because that mirror that sometimes the United States would hold up and say, like, this is a problem. We don't like this. That's gone. That's gone. So meanwhile, Donald Trump sat down with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday and was asked a couple of questions, one of which was about the Khashoggi tape that apparently exists and makes it clear that he was killed, among other things. And apparently, according to the CIA, maybe the tape, maybe other things make it clear that MBS was involved. Here is Trump responding to Chris Wallace on that.
Turkish President Erdogan says that he has shared a tape with the U.S. and other countries that is of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Have you, one, either heard the tape yourself or been briefed on it? And if so, to your mind, what does it show?
We have the tape. I don't want to hear the tape. No reason for me to hear the tape.
Why don't you want to hear it, sir?
Because it's a suffering tape. It's a terrible tape. I've been fully briefed on it. There's no reason for me to hear it. In fact, I said to the people, should I? They said, you really shouldn't. There's no reason. I know everything that went on the tape without having to.
And what happened?
It was very violent, very vicious, and terrible.
A month ago, you said you had spoken with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and that he had told you directly that he had no knowledge of
right. That's right. And still says that.
But we now know that some of the people closest to him, some of his closest advisors were part of this. Question: did MBS lie to you, sir?
I don't know. You know, who can really know? But I can say this: he's got many people now that say he had no knowledge.
What if the Crown Prince, speaking to you, the President of the United States, directly lied to you about?
Well, he told me that he had nothing to do with it. He told me that, I would say, maybe 5 times at different points.
So what if he's lying?
As recently as a few days ago.
Do you just live with it because you need him?
Well, will anybody really know? All right? Will anybody really know?
I mean, it's true. Can you know anything? How do we know, Chris, this isn't a dream? How do you know even that you exist? Maybe I wake up and you go away.
It's the mystery of epistemology, folks.
There you go. We're all just dust in the wind. So we can't know. We can't know.
That's why I don't listen to the tape. It's a real Schrodinger's cat, Chris.
There you go.
We're lost in a hermeneutic spiral.
We're just dust, Chris. We're just dust. So. Plus, I think we're making a lot of money. We got a lot of money.
Who can ever know? He's going to start saying that with a wink in like a week.
Right. Who can ever know?
Who can ever know?
You know.
Did we just axe pre-existing conditions? Who knows?
Who knows? How do we know what pre-existing is? Do we even know that we're existing? Unbelievable. There was more in that interview, right? Wasn't there one other? Yeah. Here is Chris Wallace, presumably trying to make it seem like he cares about press freedoms. Can't help but get in a dig at Obama because that is in his genes as a Fox News paid employee.
I'm totally in favor of the media. I'm totally in favor of free press. We've got to be fair press. When it's fake.
But the president get to decide what's fair and what's not.
I can tell what's fair and not. And so can my people and so can a lot of other people.
I understand that, but
when you do something very good and they write it badly, and this is consistently, when you, as an example, rarely do they talk about...
Barack Obama whined about Fox News all the time, but he never said we were the enemy of the people.
Well, no, he didn't talk about the news. He didn't talk about anything. I'm only saying it very differently than anyone's ever said it before. I'm saying fake news, false reporting, dishonest reporting, of which there is a lot, and I know it. See, I know it because I'm a subject of it. A lot of people don't know it, but when I explain it to them, they understand it. And Chris, you know that better. You don't have to sit here and act like a perfect little, wonderful, innocent angel. I know you too well. I knew your father too well. That's not your gene.
There you go. I just put you in your place.
Nepotism, Chris.
You know, I gotta say, not the first person to say that. Lugan Press.
Yeah, Merkel got the Lugan Press.
Yeah, the Lugan Press.
Protects Angela.
The lying press. The lying media. Nazis adopted that term. It was around, I think, as late as, or as early as mid-1800s. In Germany. But the Nazis revived it. I'm reviving it again. Just total coincidence.
I'm a nationalist.
Total coincidence. There you go. The Lion Lugan Press. Let's go to the phones. You're calling from an 860 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Lindsay from Brooklyn.
Lindsay from Brooklyn. What's on your mind, Lindsay?
So I was curious. So you know how like Medicare for All is becoming a very big, platform and policy that a lot of, especially Democrats or only Democrats, are championing around. And I've heard you mention a couple of times about student loan forgiveness, and then Assemblymember Ron Kim also put that bill forth to buy out student debt. So I just wanted to hear more of your thoughts about like how strong of a policy do you think student loan forgiveness will be in the upcoming years?
It's Lindsay, right?
Yes, correct.
Lindsay, I think that it's going to be an increasingly important platform. And because you're seeing, part of it will be a function of the youth turnout if it continues on this trajectory, but also the youth that is reflected in our lawmakers. I contend, and I have yet to see somebody really write about this, and I'm sure somebody has, I just haven't come across it yet, that the size of the baby boomers relative to all the generations that have passed it until you get to the millennials has dictated much of our culture and our politics, and also, what the issues are. That the baby boomers are aging is why you will see, continued strength for Medicare. Although the fact that then our, people contract in age, or I should say the Generation X is smaller, may leave Medicare a little bit vulnerable and Social Security a little bit vulnerable. And I'm not convinced that we don't hear all this in anticipation of that time. But with that said, then the millennials start to be, in your 40s, and you start to get a little bit of more of an awareness of the importance of that stuff. But I think as the millennials age in a little bit more and become a major voting bloc, you're going to see this become more of an issue because, like I said the other day, starting in 2016, the president of the National Home Builders Association was blaming student loans for the dip in housing starts. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as it goes forward because it is a real problem from an economic perspective. It is a real problem from a quality of life perspective. It's a real problem in terms of fulfilling the needs of society perspective. People aren't going into the professions that we need them to, largely because they're inhibited by the amount of debt they have.
Yeah, I mean, that's my life exactly, basically. Just an anecdote, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, is I've paid off about over $50,000 in my student debts, and only $17,000 of that went to the principal amount. The remaining of it went to interest. And
that's
effing
nuts. That's
I know,
nuts.
And I still have a ton left.
That's nuts. First of all,
yeah,
so even having to go into debt
question.
for $17,000 is absurd. But the idea that you're going to pay multiples of that is just nuts. That is a broken system. That does not make any sense. What is the point of having a society if it doesn't address that? What's the point of it?
Right.
It's absurd.
Right.
It's utterly absurd.
I totally agree.
What is the I can understand, why we have debt for I'm going to go into debt and buy a factory that's going to build chairs, and the idea is if it that debt will create some type of business opportunities and theoretically opportunities for society. I'm just speaking in just very, very broad theoretical terms. There is no sense to having people go into debt from a society's perspective to become more valuable citizens to the society. There's just no value to it because the debt itself undercuts all the benefit you're getting.
Well, right. And I mean, to me, it removes value because I originally had gone to graduate school for social work. And then by the time I graduated, my debt was in the six figures. And so I was like, I can't do social work because I won't be able to live on the salary that social workers get.
Exactly.
And then I could have bought a house by now, or at least not a house, but I could have gotten an apartment or bought a ton of other things that just are going into this black hole of my student debts instead.
Well, I hope we get to some type of debt jubilee in time to save you some more money, Lindsay.
Me too.
Appreciate the call.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yep.
Calling from a 367 area code. Oh, we don't have much time. This may be the final call of the day, folks. Calling from a 367 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi. Am I online?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Samson. I'm calling from the UK. I watch your show. I wanted to make some points. I wanted to get your opinion on Richard Ojeda and what I think is the hypocrisy, in my opinion. I just want to get your own thoughts on it between how people on, for example, TYT and maybe the far left, for example, they call out people like Kamala Harris because she failed to prosecute Steve Mnuchin, and they call out other people. They say they are not perfect, that they have a lot of issues, especially Kamala Harris. But how can TYT in the same breath and the Intercept and the other far left progressives prop up Richard Ojeda? This is the same man that doesn't support coal. He is very conservative. How can you vote for Trump and you prop up this guy? So what I just want to pinpoint is just the hypocrisy. Cenk and the rest of the TYT, they said, I question Hillary's judgment because she voted for the Iraq war. How in the same breath can you pump up someone like Ojeda who voted for Trump after Trump said he's going to kill the families of terrorists? Whose judgment is more flawed in that logic? So I just wanted you to touch on that hypocrisy. And Richard Ojeda said something that really got to me because I'm black. He said that the Democratic Party is not the party of Maxine Waters. In my opinion, that has racist overtones. You always hear Republicans say that the Democrats are the party of Schumer and Maxine Waters. So I feel that's when he mentioned Maxine Waters, the way he used that, this is not a party of Maxine Waters, I felt very offended in that. So my opinion is, why is the hypocrisy? You go after Kamala Harris she's not perfect. You go after other people that are not perfect, but yet TYT, they are literally propping up this guy like he's a savior. So why is the hypocrisy on that? Why is it like that? Why won't stand up for Kamala and other people, yet this guy whose track record you can go from everywhere, Ojeda, he doesn't have a good track record progressive wise. So why is he being pumped up? Why is the hypocrisy? Why won't stand up for Kamala Harris?
I get the point. I get the point.
Another thing I do.
All right. Well, let me.
Okay. So let me just make the second point, then I can hang up and you. Then I also wanted to talk about this idea that Julian Assange, please touch on it, is some kind of free speech guy, he's not biased. We already know this guy is a right-wing hack. He supports a lot of nationalist agendas. So please, when any progressive is trying to prop him up, let them make it clear that he sides with white supremacists. He sides with white nationalists. So I don't know why they're defending him very quickly. So please touch on that. That he's not an unbiased.
All right, no, I get your point. I get your point.
He's spreading the right-wing side.
Yes. All right.
But the most important,
I appreciate.
Okay. Harris,
okay, I get you. Yes, Ojeda and Kamala Harris. I mean, all right. Look, I think the critiques of Kamala Harris are fair. The issue sets of the people that you're talking about, and I don't think I think it's wrong to say far left. I just don't. I don't think that's an accurate description of the people that he's talking about. I don't think that any of those outlets that you're talking about are, to the left of voices you'll hear on this program. I think the Intercept, not unlike its founders, has a has a civil libertarian streak that people to the far left wouldn't be as concerned about, frankly. I also think that the people you're talking about, their issue sets are very much oriented towards the financial crimes, the lack of accountability for the elite in this country. And so I think a guy like Ojeda becomes more attractive because he is talking about a left populism. Whereas Kamala Harris, when it came time for her to deal with a guy like Steve Mnuchin, basically punted for political reasons. And I think that's I think it's a defensible position, broadly speaking. Put aside for a moment the personalities that it tends to lead people to supporting. I think that is a broadly very defensible position, that we have a problem in this country with two-tiered justice and lack of accountability. And, just the idea that Donald Trump is not in prison 5 years ago, frankly, is an example of that. Never mind a certain percentage of the people in his cabinet. With that said, and I didn't hear Ojeda's comment about Maxine Waters. But Ojeda has some problems, from my estimation, that I overlook in the context of West Virginia. Would I vote for this guy for president of the United States? I don't think so. Do I like some of his policy prescriptions? Yes. Are others that I like? No. For West Virginia, as a congressperson, great. I think nationally speaking, we could probably do better. Look, I think a lot of this stuff gets, is reductionist. And so, that's what I think explains it. I don't know how else to describe it. I think there are policy prescriptions, and Ojeda's take, particularly in red states, I think is effective. You could easily argue that Joe Manchin's is even more effective because he actually wins. in his, West Virginia's was what, plus 35 for Trump, plus 40 for Trump. And Manchin won by, overperformed that by another 5 points, 6 points. So when we're talking about vote swings, Manchin does as well as Ojeda. But he does it on a statewide basis. And he won. Manchin is a crook in many respects. So I just the argument gets muddled, it seems to me. It seems to me it is much better to make the argument that Richard Ojeda has a policy set, an issue set that is positive, and he has to make some compromises, or that issue set is somewhat compromised because he's running in West Virginia. So he's a little bit more, I think, coal friendly. So he's a little bit more, whitish, as it were.
It's definitely not what we need at a national level.
Exactly. But would I like to see that level of skepticism towards financial institutions? Do I think that his voice, as he projects it on the national stage, will be helpful in the campaign? Yeah, I do. I would like some other candidate to have to come in and steal, essentially, or migrate to his positions. In the same way that the party moved to the left on Medicare for All because of Bernie's run, if he gets a more jaundiced view towards money into the Democratic Party, then good. That's my perspective on it. I don't think it's helpful to get too caught up in personalities. It all just gets to be a little bit too much high school. We can't quite afford that stuff. But there's a tendency to do that because that's the way human beings function. And it becomes easier than actually sort of some measure of nuance. And as far as Julian Assange, I think the mission of WikiLeaks initially was quite positive. I think somewhere down the road it got corrupted. I think we don't know the nature of what Julian Assange is indicted for. Marcy Wheeler has a great post where she lays out 4 different scenarios, and one of them is a legit undertaking from her perspective and does not endanger the freedom of the press and whatnot. Put aside what Julian Assange, whose team he's on or whatever it is. If you indict a guy for certain activities that other journalists that you may like engage in, then it's a problem. So, again, we need to know more about Assange, but, separate the personalities. It's much easier to have a perspective that everybody's a jerk and an a-hole and are liars. And then just start assessing, what do they actually do and what they're going to bring to the party. That would be my advice. All right, that is it for our calls. I'll save those other ones for tomorrow. To play that Saturday Night Live stuff, you get pinched anyways. I don't think it's that great. It's annoying.
Yeah, it's just
we
annoying.
We can talk about it.
You can get annoying in a couple.
We'll talk about it maybe when we talk a little more about Amazon. One more, Nick. I'm sure this point has been made, but has anyone noticed that Trump's literally a cartoon character? He has one shtick he repeats in every situation and has 4 outfits he's cycling through. Yes. Yeah. I think that's why he does so well. Sam's Tinder profile. Hey, girl, swipe right. How about you be my first lady of New York? That is not that would be running for governor. JJ Cool. Are there no intellectual property rights laws that can protect the show's brand from Pac-Man? Also, does having 2 TMBS shows in 1 week correlate with no Michael Monday? A Baskin.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Will Janine be on the show this week? How to Survive Thanksgiving? Yes, she's going to call in probably the fun half on Wednesday. Sean, vote Seder. Play the hero some game. Willie C. Sam, what do you think of the argument that the purpose of PAYGO is to tie POTUS and McConnell's hands until 2021? Sort of like Schumer's pledge to restore judicial filibuster was about stifling right-wing judge appointments. I don't understand why you can't just have a democratically controlled Congress and the ability to bring up bills on the floor as a way of controlling the Republicans. You don't need that PAYGO. Chicken Crowder. Crowder took the rest of the year off to deal with fibromyalgia. I know, we're going to speak about that tomorrow. Ramblerun, projection. I see the end of the union coming. Can you guys get a lefty on to talk about the market? I don't know if you've noticed, but the market's been in the tank for a month and a half, 2 months now. Yeah, maybe. Max in Phoenix, sounds like that center wants to take the United out of the United States of America. By Gada, Sam, why do they call themselves the Federalist Society? It's an oxymoron. Well, federalism, it's a confusing term, but it means that you distribute a certain amount of power. You have limited federal. I don't understand.
You devolve them to the states.
Yeah, I don't understand why it's called federalism. You would think it would be confederalism.
During the Mike Lee clip, I'm like, if it's federalism and violence, I'm like, federalism, obviously, because instantly I thought that was the federal government doing things.
No,
that seemed to make the most sense.
Yes,
but
that is a
that's not it.
confusing term. I don't know why, but the Federalist Society, you would think, would be in favor of a strong federal government. But instead, what it means that a federalist, and it's confusing because I think maybe they adopted from the Federalist Papers as a way of trying to imply that the Federalist Papers did not want to have a strong federal government. But this is early Mike Luntz shit.
Yeah, you can find some counterexamples in the Federalist Papers to certain things that the Federalist Society wants to do.
Without a doubt. But federalism, and I don't know the etymology of the development of that word in this context, means that a significant amount of power is devolved to the states. But it's really, we would call that confederalism, it seems to me.
Slightly worse brand, I think.
Super genitals. Am I dreaming, or did you guys use the Jimmy Dore Don't Freak Out song without the lyrics before the discussion with Anna last Friday? That's red flaggy. I don't know.
I'm not sure what that was referring to.
Jibup State, did you see Emma talking to the Trump supporter? Said he would literally kill his Democratic sister if it came down to it. Yeah, that's nuts. Bravo-matic, Brian Kemp just announced that disgraced former Transportation Secretary Tom Price has been appointed to his transition team. Wonderful. Keenan 3754, Sam, you ever feel ridiculous when reading the president's quotes? Yes. Farmer Gillian, during this past election, 10 Oregon counties, including my stupid conservative county, had ballot measures on Second Amendment rights. Like county residents have the right to own semi-automatic weapons and high-capacity magazines without any registration requirement. Two saving graces in my county where the re-elected sheriff who would enact such measures is a commonsensical guy, and that measures narrowly passed by less than a percentage point. And this is a state where Democrats now have a supermajority in the legislature, and our gun safety governor was reelected by a large margin. All right, 3 more. Secret identity politics. Despite the way the Republicans have gerrymandered the state of Ohio into permanent redness, most conservatives I know get hung up on the idea that individual Democrats get to keep their cushy seats because nearly all the Democrats have been drawn into a few districts. In reality, the way the Democrats and Republicans have drawn districts is symbolic. Republicans can control the state, individual Democrats can keep their jobs, and Republican voters end up projecting their own job insecurity onto these Democratic legislators. It's self-reinforcing. Trump's umbrella. Hello, is anybody there? Did you guys see the right-wing cuck rally in Philly where 30 people showed up? Hundreds turned out in opposition, wielding anti-fascist gritty signage. And the final IM of the day. Vegan Angelical, stop calling Trump a moron or he won't come on your show. Apologize now. Please. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get